Hi, I'm reading Leviticus, and God gives a command in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 19 and 20, to harm your neighbor as he harmed you, the principle eye for an eye. And then if I go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39, it seems like Jesus separates himself from the God that gave the command in Leviticus, and then Jesus gives a different command. How is this possible if Jesus is the same God of the Old Testament?
Hey, thank you so much, Don, for your question. Is this a contradiction? Jesus quoting from Leviticus, but then saying, this is what I say to you. Okay, a few things I think to highlight here. This is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It begins in chapter 5, verse 1, seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. This is really echoing the book of Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 18, where Moses went up on the mountain to deliver the law of God to the people of God. And this is, in one sense, what Jesus is doing here. He's going up on the mountain, he's giving the law of God, and he makes it very clear in chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, that he isn't here to set aside God's law. No, he says very clearly in verse 17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. In other words, Jesus is not minimizing the law in the Sermon on the Mount or setting the law aside. No, he's pointing us ultimately to the law's fulfillment, which is love. And over again in the Gospels and in the epistles as well, this is something that we see. Love, perfect love of God and perfect love of neighbor, is the fulfillment of all the commandments. If we love God perfectly and if we love each other as we should, we're going to keep the law perfectly. And what Jesus is highlighting here in the Sermon on the Mount is that people don't do that. This is why he goes on to say there in chapter 5, verse 20, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. He's exposing them as hypocrites, as people who, it seems like they're keeping the law, going through the motions, but they weren't. Not the law of love, not what they were ultimately called to do. And then he jumps into, these repeated commandments. He says, in verse 21, you have heard that it was said to those of old, but I say unto you. Now, this isn't Jesus setting aside the law or minimizing the law even. It's him coming as the authoritative Lord. Actually, this phrase that he repeats 6 times throughout the Sermon on the Mount, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you, identifies him as the lawgiver, as God. This is not one of the passages that we often point to when we're making a case for the deity of Jesus Christ, but it's one of the passages that we can point to, because he's saying, I have the authority. I'm the one who speaks, and my word is the law. And so when he's talking about retaliation in verses 38 and following, you've heard that it was said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. He's not, again, abolishing the law. He's pointing to the law's fulfillment, love, and even those commandments that were given under the Old Covenant. The goal of those commandments was to keep people from harming each other. It was this barrier that was put up, this law that was put up for Israel, in order to keep people within the community from harming each other, because there would be a repercussion, because they would be dealt with. And so Jesus is here not abolishing the law, but he's pointing us to what its ultimate fulfillment is, love. And as the crowd is listening to him there at the sermon or during the Sermon on the Mount, they're thinking, boy, we all fall short. Not a one of us keeps the law of God like we should. And friends, just read the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says things like, if you've looked at someone lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. What the law of God does is it exposes all of us as in need of the grace of God and the mercy of God. And certainly, Jesus is highlighting that here as well. And so no contradiction. In fact, we have the revelation of Jesus as the lawgiver, the Lord himself, a new Moses, if you will, in the sense that he's delivering the law from the top of a mountain so that he might drive his listeners to the grace of God? Thank you for your question again, Don. May the Lord bless you.